Welcome to America's Scariest Folktales Explained, History for Sleep. Tonight, we travel into the gentle shadows of America's past, where stories were told not only to frighten, but to comfort restless hearts. These tales rose from forests and valleys, from quiet villages and lonely roads, whispered in candlelight to explain the unexplainable. As you listen, you may notice how fear becomes softer in the rhythm of storytelling, how voices from long ago still echo like wind through the trees. Ghost riders, wandering lights, and mysterious whispers, each as less a terror than a reflection of human longing, of the way people sought meaning in the dark. This is Mythoria, a place where history drifts into dream, and dream carries you gently towards sleep. Rest easy now, let the world grow quiet, and allow your mind to wander into these old and lingering tales. Now, let us begin. America's Scariest Folktales Explained, History for Sleep. America's Scariest Folktales Explained. Part 1. Whispers in the Woods. You step into the quiet forests of America, where shadows hold secrets and every rustle carries a story. These woods have long been home to whispers, half warnings, half lullabies. You find yourself standing at the edge of a quiet American forest. The sun has set, and the last traces of light filter through the branches like threads of fading gold. The air is cool, soft, and heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Each breath you take carries the memory of centuries, as if the land itself is whispering its secrets into your lungs. You pause, and in the silence, you realize how alive the woods are, not only with animals, but with stories that linger like shadows. In these forests, long before there were towns or highways, people told tales by firelight. Native tribes passed down their stories in the language of rhythm and ritual. The woods were not empty to them. They were alive, filled with spirits that protected, punished, or simply reminded people of the thin line between the human world and the unseen. A rustle in the branches was not just wind. It was a sign, a presence, a reminder that you are never fully alone when you step beneath the canopy of trees. As you listen more closely, you notice the way the forest itself becomes a storyteller. Every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig beneath your feet becomes part of a soft narrative. People once believed that the woods could carry voices, sometimes the voices of loved ones long gone, sometimes the voices of strangers who had never been known. It was easy to get lost in both the paths and the imagination. For what is a folk tale if not a map, guiding you through fear toward meaning? You walk deeper, your steps steady but unhurried. The night settles around you like a blanket. In the distance, you hear an owl calling, a slow, mournful sound that feels less like a warning and more like a lullaby. Long ago, settlers who crossed into these forests carried their own beliefs with them. Many came from Europe, where stories of ghosts and wandering spirits were already old. They brought with them fears of the dark, of witches who whispered spells, and of creatures who could not be seen until it was too late. The American woods, vast and untamed, gave those old fears new life. Here, folklore became a way of making sense of the unknown. When crops failed, when children disappeared, when the nights grew too long, people told stories. They spoke of strange figures glimpsed in the shadows, of voices calling from the tree line, of lights flickering where no lantern should be. Fear was not just an enemy. It was a companion. It kept people alert, it kept them cautious, and it shaped the stories that would be passed down through generations until they became as much a part of the landscape as the trees themselves. As you listen now, you realize that these whispers are not only about terror, they are about connection. Every story is an attempt to explain what cannot be fully seen. A folk tale is like the echo of footsteps. You do not see the traveler, but you know they have passed this way, and so the woods become a living archive, a library of shadows and rustling leaves. Each tree is a page. Each silence is a punctuation mark. You sit for a moment beneath an ancient oak, its branches stretching wide like arms. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear the voices of those who came before. A mother telling her children to stay close. A traveler warning his friend about the figure he saw near the crossroads. A community gathered around the fire, speaking of things too mysterious to name. The stories may sound frightening, but beneath the fear lies something gentler, the desire to keep one another safe. The woods, then, are not just a place of danger. They are a place of memory. They hold the fears and hopes of countless people, layered like rings in a tree trunk. And as you sit in the quiet, you notice how the fear itself softens. What once felt threatening now feels like a gentle reminder. The unknown is always with us, but it does not need to overwhelm. It can simply be a whisper, guiding us inward, deeper into rest, deeper into reflection. And so, as you rise to continue your journey, you carry with you a simple question. When the forest whispers, is it warning you, or is it simply reminding you that you are part of a story much older than yourself? The legend of Sleepy Hollow, a headless rider, a lonely road, and the weight of fear in the night. You follow Ichabod Crane, not through fright, but through the slow rhythm of folklore that lingers like mist. You step away from the forest's hush and into a different kind of stillness. A valley wrapped in fog, where time seems slower and dreams blur with waking. This is Sleepy Hollow, a place so quiet, so secluded, that people believed the air itself carried enchantment. The trees lean close here, their branches arching like cathedral ceilings, and the Hudson River drifts nearby with a calm, steady flow. To walk these roads at night is to walk not only through the landscape, but through layers of memory, belief, and unease. The story of Sleepy Hollow begins not with terror, but with atmosphere. Long ago, Dutch settlers who came to this valley brought with them stories of spirits and phantoms, tales meant to explain the strange feelings of the night. They whispered of ghostly figures riding through the mist, of restless souls caught between worlds. In this land, those whispers grew louder until they gave birth to one of America's most enduring folk tales, the legend of the Headless Horseman. The horseman was said to be the ghost of a Hessian soldier, a man who had fought in the Revolutionary War and lost his head to a cannonball. His body was buried near Sleepy Hollow, but his spirit could not rest. By night, he rose from his grave, riding furiously across the countryside in search of his missing head. He was not just a figure of horror. He was a symbol of how the scars of war linger long after the fighting ends. Fear and history merged into one shadowy rider. And into this valley walked Ichabod Crane. He was not a soldier, nor a hero, but a schoolmaster, a thin, awkward man with sharp features and a curious mind. He came to Sleepy Hollow to teach children, but he also sought comfort, wealth, and perhaps a marriage that would grant him security. Ichabod was fascinated by the stories of the place. Around hearth fires, he listened closely to the locals as they spoke of the horsemen, their voices low, their eyes glancing toward the window as though the ghost might be listening. It was easy for Ichabod to believe. The nights in Sleepy Hollow were so deep, the silences so thick, that imagination had no limits. Every rustling leaf became a sign, every shifting shadow a possible spirit. And when he rode alone on his horse, the road winding through the valley, his mind filled with both wonder and dread. The tale reaches its peak on one such night, when Ichabod left a gathering at the Van Tassel household. The moon was pale, the mist was heavy, and his path home took him through the darkest parts of the valley. Every sound startled him, the croak of a frog, the crack of a twig, the whisper of the wind in the trees. And then he saw it. A dark rider looming in the shadows, towering on horseback. At first, he tried to convince himself it was another traveler, but as the figure drew closer, Ichabod's heart froze. The rider had no head upon his shoulders. The chase that followed has become legend. Ichabod spurred his horse forward, galloping faster and faster, the phantom rider behind him, silent but relentless. The pounding of hooves echoed like thunder, a rhythm of fear pulsing through the night. Ichabod's only hope was to reach the bridge near the churchyard, for local lore said the spirit could not cross it. He leaned forward, desperate, the bridge in sight. But just as he thought he had escaped, the horseman lifted his arm and hurled his own head directly at Ichabod. The next morning, Ichabod was gone. Some said he fled the valley, never to return. Others believed the horseman had claimed him. Only a shattered saddle and a smashed pumpkin were found near the bridge. The people of Sleepy Hollow continued to tell the story, not as a warning, but as a reminder that some places carry mysteries you cannot explain. Tonight, as you picture that quiet valley, you may feel the same hush, the kind of silence that makes every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. You might ask yourself, was the horseman a ghost, a trick, or simply the echo of fear in a lonely heart? The truth may not matter. What matters is the way stories like this linger, keeping us awake to the possibility that the world is always more mysterious than we imagine. And so, as you drift deeper into reflection, the question remains, soft and unresolved. When you ride alone through the night, what shadows follow you? Witches of New England. Salem's whispers echo through centuries, not just of trials, but of fear woven into daily life. You pause, sensing how belief and fear entwine, shaping the very breath of a community. You travel now from the misty valley of Sleepy Hollow to the colder air of New England. Here, the land feels older, the soil heavy with memory, the towns stitched together by narrow roads and wooden houses. The year is the late 1600s, and the quiet of night carries not only the rustling of trees, but also the unspoken fears of entire communities. These were people who lived with uncertainty, harsh winters, failing crops, sickness that arrived without warning. In such a world, fear needed a face, and often that face became the image of a witch. The Salem witch trials of Massachusetts are remembered as one of America's darkest chapters. Yet, when you slow down and step softly into the rhythm of that time, you begin to understand how ordinary the fears were. People truly believed that the devil could walk among them, not as a horned creature of fire, but as a neighbor, a friend, perhaps even a child. Witchcraft was not seen as a fantasy. It was thought to be as real as the wind in the trees or the crackle of fire in the hearth. Imagine yourself in a small Puritan village. The nights are long, the light of a single candle your only defense against the vastness of darkness. A cow falls ill. A child has a fever that will not break. A loaf of bread spoils too quickly. These small misfortunes in a fragile world feel like signs. People looked for causes, and where explanations were missing, suspicion took root. Whispers began. Perhaps a woman in the village had cursed them. Perhaps someone was speaking with the devil. The line between faith and fear blurred until they became almost the same. In 1692, the whispers grew louder in Salem. A group of young girls claimed to be tormented by invisible spirits, their bodies convulsing, their voices crying out in fear. The village listened, and instead of questioning the strangeness, they accepted it as proof of dark forces at work. Soon, accusations spread like wildfire. Ordinary women, widows, healers, those who stood slightly apart from the strict expectations of society, were named as witches. Even men and respected citizens found themselves caught in the storm. Trials followed, but they were not trials as we know them now. Evidence was not solid, but spectral. Visions, dreams, the word of one person against another. The more people denied, the guiltier they seemed. Those who confessed to witchcraft sometimes lived, though their lives were forever marked. Those who refused often faced death. The gallows in Salem rose against the sky, and with each execution, the community believed it was purging itself of evil. Yet in truth, it was consuming itself with fear. As you reflect, you begin to see the deeper pattern. The witch trials were less about witches and more about control, about a society struggling to hold together under the weight of uncertainty. Fear was not just personal, it was collective. It became a language spoken by the entire village, binding them together in suspicion. And when fear is shared, it feels almost rational, even when it destroys. Tonight, the image of Salem lingers not as a place of horror, but as a mirror. How often do communities, even now, find someone to blame for their misfortunes? How often does fear transform into accusation, into judgment, into a story that feels true because everyone repeats it? The Witch of Salem is not only a figure of history, she is the embodiment of how humans project their anxieties onto others when answers seem too distant. Yet, even in this darkness, there is something soft to carry with you. The memory of those accused is also a reminder of resilience. They lived, they resisted. Some even went to their deaths with quiet strength, refusing to bend their truth to fear. In their silence, in their last words, there was a kind of dignity that no gallows could erase. And so, as you let this chapter settle in your mind, you ask yourself gently, what whispers do you carry in your own life? Which fears are real, and which are simply the shadows of a candle flickering against the wall? The Bell Witch of Tennessee. A haunting that feels like a presence in the room. You trace the tale of the Bell family, where voices in the air remind you of how fear itself becomes its own storyteller. You leave behind the cold towns of New England and journey south, into the rolling hills of Tennessee. The air is warmer here, but the silence carries its own weight. The land is wide and open, yet it feels as if something unseen moves just beyond the edge of vision. This is where the tale of the Bell Witch lives, a story that has lingered for over 2 centuries, whispered from porch to porch, fire to fire, as though the spirit itself insists on being remembered. The Bell family lived in Red River, Tennessee, in the early 1800s. They were farmers, their days shaped by the rhythm of planting, harvest, and quiet evenings under lantern light. But one night, the quiet broke. Strange sounds filled their house. Knockings on the walls, chains dragging across the floor, the faint scratching of claws against wood. At first, the family thought it was animals, perhaps a trick of the wind, but as days turned to weeks, the noises grew louder, stranger, more insistent. Soon, the presence began to speak. A voice, sometimes faint, sometimes loud, filled the rooms. It mocked, it laughed, it sang hymns, it whispered secrets no one else could have known. The family realized they were not dealing with an ordinary haunting. They called the presence a witch, though it was unlike the witches accused in Salem. This was something invisible, yet powerful, playful at times, cruel at others. And once it began, it did not stop. The witch seemed to focus on John Bell, the father of the family. He grew weaker as the months passed, his health failing under the weight of unseen torment. The voice often declared it would kill him, and in 1820, John Bell died under mysterious circumstances. Some believed the witch had poisoned him. The presence even claimed responsibility, its voice heard at his funeral, laughing in triumph. For the people of Red River, the tale became proof that this was no ordinary haunting. It was a force that could reach into life and death itself. Yet the Bell Witch was not only cruel, it could also be strangely tender. The voice sometimes recited scripture. It sang hymns softly in the night. It protected certain members of the family even as it tormented others. The contradictions gave it power. It could not be easily defined, and so it lived in the imagination of everyone who heard the story. Was it a ghost? A demon? A trick of collective fear? The lack of certainty only made the tale grow. As word spread, visitors came from far and wide. Even General Andrew Jackson, who would later become President of the United States, is said to have visited the Bell Farm, curious to experience the witch for himself. Stories claim that his men heard the voice, felt the presence, and left shaken. Whether legend or truth, the connection between a future president and a rural haunting only deepened the mystery, binding folklore and history together like threads in the same tapestry. When you reflect on the Bell Witch, you realize the story is not just about one family. It is about how communities explain the unexplainable. In the quiet, rural nights of Tennessee, the strange sounds in the dark became a vessel for every unspoken fear. Fear of illness, fear of death, fear of the unknown. By giving those fears a voice, a witch who laughed, cursed, and sang, people found a way to face them, even if they could not defeat them. Now, as you picture that farmhouse, its wooden walls creaking in the night, you may feel a shiver, but also a strange calm. For the witch's story is not just about terror. It is about the human need to name what we cannot see, to shape mystery into narrative, to transform fear into story. And as you listen, you may wonder softly, when the night falls quiet and you hear a sound no one else hears, is it simply the wind or something waiting to be remembered? Ghost lights of the South. In the quiet roads of the South, lights drift like wandering souls. You follow them, wondering if they are warnings or simply reflections of longing and memory. You move now from the farmhouses of Tennessee into the wide, open stretches of the American South. Here, the nights are heavy with warmth, and the air carries the scent of earth, grass, and water. Roads cut across fields and swamps, and when the sun slips below the horizon, the darkness deepens quickly. It is in this darkness that people speak of strange lights, wandering, floating, flickering like lanterns that belong to no hand. They are called ghost lights, or sometimes will-o'-the-wisps, and their mystery has haunted travelers for generations. One of the most famous is the Mako Light of North Carolina. For years, people walking near the railroad tracks told of a shining orb that appeared at night. Sometimes it drifted slowly, other times it darted quickly, as though searching for something it had lost. Locals whispered that the light was the ghost of a railroad worker who had been decapitated in an accident. They said he still walked the tracks, lantern in hand, searching for his missing head. Night after night, people claimed to see it, an eerie glow that faded when approached, only to reappear farther down the line. In Arkansas, the stories shift to the Gurdon Light. Along the tracks near the small town of Gurdon, a blue-white light is said to float in the darkness. Scientists have suggested swamp gas or reflections from headlights, but the legend is harder to silence. People believe it is the spirit of a railroad worker murdered long ago, still patrolling the tracks, warning travelers of danger. To see the light is unsettling, but not always frightening. Some even say it feels protective, as though the dead are still watching over the living. Farther south, the swamps of Texas and Louisiana hold their own stories. There, the ghost lights are said to drift across the water, glowing softly above the marsh. They move with no rhythm, appearing and vanishing as if guided by a hidden hand. Travelers who saw them spoke of feeling both wonder and unease, as if the lights were leading them somewhere. Some believed they were spirits trying to lure the living deeper into the swamps. Others thought they were souls, restless and wandering, unable to find peace. When you pause to reflect, you notice the gentle rhythm that unites all these tales. The lights are never still. They drift, they flicker, they disappear and return. They are like the thoughts of the human heart, always moving, never fully grasped. For the people of the South, these lights became symbols of mystery and longing. They were reminders that life does not always end cleanly, that sometimes stories stretch beyond the boundaries of death, glowing faintly like embers in the night. Modern explanations, swamp gas, static electricity, headlights, do not erase the stories. In fact, they add to them. For even if science gives us one answer, the imagination often prefers another. A glowing orb on a dark road is not only chemistry, it is a moment when the unknown presses close. To dismiss it entirely is to miss the hush that falls when people gather to share their experiences. The ghost light becomes less about the light itself and more about the way humans lean in, whisper, and wonder together. Tonight, as you picture those quiet southern roads, you may see the darkness stretch out before you, empty yet alive. Then, faintly, you notice a glow, soft, flickering there and not there. You know it might be nothing more than mist catching the moonlight. Yet your heart beats differently, because in that glow you sense a story. You sense the countless eyes that have watched before you, the countless voices that have tried to explain. The lights may guide, or they may mislead. They may comfort, or they may unsettle. But always, they remind you of the thin veil between the seen and the unseen. And so you ask yourself gently, when the night is darkest, what light do you follow, and where might it lead you? Resting with the stories. You return from the journey with your heart softer, carrying not terror, but reflection. These stories are less about fear and more about the way people soothe their unspoken anxieties at night. You return now from your journey through America's folk tales, carrying the echoes of forests, valleys, and quiet roads. The stories have moved through you like drifting lanterns, each one flickering with fear, with wonder, with memory. They began as whispers in the woods, deepened in the valley of Sleepy Hollow, darkened in Salem, stirred the farmhouse in Tennessee, and glowed across the southern swamps. And now, at the end of the path, you pause to rest, not to fear, but to reflect. Folk tales are not simply stories. They are vessels carrying the emotions of entire communities. When people face the unknown, illness, storms, accidents, and death, they gave shape to their fears through story. A ghostwriter chasing a schoolmaster, a voice haunting a family, lights wandering across a lonely road. Each tale was both a warning and a comfort, a way to say, we are not alone in our struggles. Even in terror, there is connection. When you listen closely, you realize these stories are not really about monsters or spirits. They are about people. They reveal the longings of the heart, the need for safety, for explanation, for meaning in the face of uncertainty. A tale of witches speaks not just of magic, but of how fear can turn neighbor against neighbor. A tale of a ghost light speaks not only of mystery, but of how hope lingers, glowing even in the darkest night. The supernatural becomes a mirror, reflecting back the very human truths of loneliness, doubt, and resilience. You breathe slowly, letting these truths settle within you. The rhythm of the stories has a way of calming the mind, like waves smoothing the sand on a shoreline. What once seemed frightening, the headless horseman, the laughing witch, the drifting lights, softens into poetry. You notice how fear, when spoken aloud, transforms into something gentler. The act of telling itself is a kind of healing. Now you see why these tales endure. They are not bound to the past. Each time they are spoken, they come alive again, reshaped by the voice that carries them. They become lullabies for the restless, lessons for the cautious, and sparks of imagination for the dreamer. The bell witch still whispers because people still whisper her name. The lights still flicker because people still look for them. The horseman still rides because fear still rides with us. And yet, none of these shadows can touch you here in this quiet moment of reflection. Imagine yourself by a fire, the flames low, the night outside vast and still. Around you sit those who came before. Settlers, farmers, children with wide eyes, elders with voices worn soft by time. They tell their stories, not to frighten you, but to remind you that life has always held mysteries. You're part of this long chain of listening, a link in the tradition of wonder. The voices of the past reach you not as screams, but as whispers, guiding you gently into rest. And so, you let the stories settle like leaves drifting to the ground. You carry them not as burdens, but as companions. They remind you that fear is a natural part of being human, yet fear can also be softened by meaning, by rhythm, by shared imagination. The tales are less about ghosts than about the way we hold each other in the dark, through words, through memory, through care. As you close your eyes, the voices fade into stillness. The woods grow quiet, the rider rests, the lights vanish into the horizon. You are left with calm, with breath, with the steady beat of your own heart. The stories have done their work. They have reminded you that even in the darkest night, you are never truly alone. And so the journey ends, not in fear, but in peace. A soft question lingers as you drift toward sleep. What stories will you carry with you into your own dreams, and what whispers will you leave for those who come after? A quiet return. And now, your journey through America's folk tales comes to an end. You have walked among forests where whispers linger, crossed valleys where riders roam, listened to voices of witches and spirits, and watched lights drift across the southern dark. Each story has brushed against your imagination, not to startle you, but to slow your breath, to remind you of how deeply stories live within us. Folk tales are like echoes. They stretch across time, softened by the distance, reshaped by each voice that carries them forward. They are less about ghosts than about the people who believed in them, their fears, their hopes, their need for connection in a world that often felt uncertain. By listening tonight, you too have stepped into that long tradition, becoming part of the quiet chain that links past to present, dreamer to dreamer. As you rest now, you carry these tales not as burdens, but as gentle companions. Let them drift to the edges of your thoughts, like fireflies fading into the night sky. The stories may return in dreams, or they may simply dissolve, leaving only a sense of calm, of stillness, of being held by something older and larger than yourself. Close your eyes and let the silence stretch wide. The night asks nothing of you now. The stories have been told. You are safe. You are at rest. And as sleep gathers, soft and steady, you may remember that even the scariest tales can end in quiet, in peace, in the comfort of knowing you are never truly alone.